Good morning. Today I want to talk you through the theory of natural selection proposed by Darwin and Wallace. I want to start today by talking about a few misconceptions that were common during the early 1800s when Darwin and Wallace were working on their theory and sort of developing these ideas. And so the first misconception I want to talk about is Darwin and Wallace lived at a time when lots of people believed that the Earth wasn't billions of years old. It was only a few thousand years old. And so Darwin and Wallace are going to need a length of time, right, in order to set up their theory of natural selection. A second common belief or misconception in the 1800s was that fixed species were placed on the Earth's surface and they did not change. And there was almost this ladder of life from sort of bacteria and things like that all the way to like humans on the pinnacle or top of this ladder. This was proposed by a lot of the earlier philosophers like Aristotle, that these fixed species were not changing, and they're going to have to like sort of overcome that misconception. And lastly, there were scientists thinking about evolution, believing in evolution, but like sort of having incorrect mechanisms or causes for evolution. And Lamarck is famous for kind of getting the mechanism of evolution wrong, but Darwin's going to use and Wallace are going to use some of the verbiage and some of the ideas from these people working out the theory in their own theories in order to put together the theory of natural selection. Lamarck's views included individuals learning new things over the course of their life and then developing those traits and passing them on to their offspring. I show a picture of giraffes because Lamarck's view would have a giraffe reaching and reaching higher and higher to grasp leaves taller and taller in the like sort of canopy, and then growing the length of their necks in their lifetimes, passing those traits on to their offspring. We now do not believe that individuals can change in their lifespan or evolve in their lifespan over time in terms of biology, but we do believe that populations, so a whole group of organisms living together, can change over time, and so that's kind of a subtle difference. But there were many misconceptions at the time. Darwin and Wallace then, Darwin was born in 1809, and Darwin, when he was born into kind of a wealthy English family. He went to college in his late teens and early 20s. And at the end of his time, he was kind of a little bit unsettled in college, had lots of different majors, like many of the students that you probably know as well. And in like sort of at the end of his career, he knew a naturalist who helped sign him up for this refitted warship called the Beagle. He was going to serve as a naturalist. He signed up for 2 years on this ship. It turned out to be 5 years of time. So Darwin actually goes on this ship and goes around the South American border, mapping. One of the points of this particular voyage was to map the coastline so that ships could more easily like sail around. He joins this particular expedition in 1831. And then it goes until 1836. Now, just before this expedition, a Scottish geologist named Lyell had published a book called Principles of Geology. And this is one of the books that is in the library of this warship, the Beagle, that Darwin's going to sail on. And one of the things that Lyell's going to present is this idea that Earth is really, really old, billions of years old, right? Like we're going to sort of claim today. So Earth is quite old, and there's a gradualism or gradual changes that influence Earth over time and then cause different mountain ranges to erode into what they look like today, or different sort of mountain ranges to form due to conversion and things of this nature. But this idea of gradualism, gradual changes over very long periods of time, is something that Darwin's going to borrow from Lyell. Darwin returns in 1836 from his Beagle voyage and starts writing his essay. He writes almost every day. Again, he's sort of on on a piece of land outside of London. You can actually go tour his house. And he actually writes every day on his theory. So he looks at all the collections he's made, provides evidence for his particular theory. In 1858, a young scientist who was doing his own voyage in Indonesia, named Alfred Russel Wallace, sends Darwin his own theory. And Darwin has already sort of written and come to these conclusions, but he's kind of sat on his theory because he knows that he's going to shake up some of the beliefs in the church and some of the beliefs of society around him. But Wallace suddenly sends him the same conclusion, right? This idea of natural selection. And I think Darwin was probably like, oh, I'm going to get scooped. And so the two co-publish a paper in 1858. It's a very short paper. And then in 1859, Darwin publishes his book on the origin of species that really lays out a very detailed set of different kinds of evidences and arguments for his theory and this mechanism of natural selection. So I want to walk you through the theory. So here's what the origin of species, this book that was published in 1859, looked like. But in this theory and in the co-published paper between Darwin and Wallace, they're going to lay out different kinds of things, observations that they have made, providing that natural selection is the mechanism or the cause, and what it causes is populations to change over time, which is evolution. So their theory kind of was written out like this. Darwin and Wallace saw over and over again, first, overproduction of offspring. So in nature, they saw over and over again where trees would produce more seeds than what could possibly survive in the environment, or fungus would create more spores, or fish would create more sort of fry that then could survive in a particular environment. Within those groups born, then Darwin and Wallace also noticed individual variations. So they noticed that not all the offspring looked the same or had the same sets of traits, right? They had different fin lengths or different sort of variation on leaves and colors and various things like this. So there was individual variation within those populations. So Darwin and Wallace proposed natural selection as their mechanism for causing evolution. And natural selection states that if there is individual variation within a population, then those organisms with certain characteristics will survive longer than others with other characteristics. And by surviving longer, you get to reproduce more. You have differential reproductive success. And this means that if you survive longer, reproduce more, you get to pass more of your genes to the next generation. So this was at the heart of their mechanism, natural selection, that's going to cause evolution. So the conclusion, or the fourth point, is that what results then from natural selection is evolution, or populations accumulating new traits or new characteristics over time. And so that populations are going to change over time due to this like sort of effect of natural selection. Now, I want to just sort of underline this, that Darwin and Wallace are proposing this mechanism that they called natural selection. So this is the mechanism or the cause for what they call descent with modification, what we call evolution today. And natural selection is differential survival and reproduction. It is this idea that certain individuals with certain traits are going to survive better and then reproduce more, passing more of their traits on to the future generations. Now, what the result of this natural selection is evolution, or they called it descent with modification. But evolution is a population changing through time by the action of natural selection, according to Darwin and Wallace, so that populations change and they accumulate modifications or adaptations over time, and then your population changes. Notice that it's populations changing, not individuals changing over time. These adaptations then are traits that help an organism survive. And so I think this is where we get this term survival of the fittest. I I like that idea, but it's really only half of the theory of natural selection, because you have to have differential reproductive success. So you have to have certain individuals reproducing more, surviving longer, reproducing more to pass those genes to that next generation. So hopefully this gives you an idea of the basics of the theory of natural selection. You'll have a study sheet that goes over some of the details of that as well. Thank you, and see you next time.